He was just a delivery man until he saved the millionaire's life during surgery. Michael Johnson was breathing heavily as he rushed through the corridors of Mercy Medical Center in New York City, carrying a red backpack that weighed more than it should. His last delivery of the day had turned into the worst nightmare of his life. It all started 20 minutes earlier when the elevator got stuck between the 10th and 11th floors. Inside were only Michael and Dr. Richard Anderson, the most renowned cardiovascular surgeon in the country. The same man who moments before had humiliated him at the reception for getting in the way with his delivery bag. "Kid, can't you see you're in the way?" the doctor had shouted, shoving Michael aside. "People like you shouldn't even be allowed in here." Now, inside the stalled elevator, Dr. Anderson was pale, clutching his chest tightly and struggling for air. His arrogant words had turned into groans of pain. "Doctor, are you okay?" Michael asked, completely forgetting the humiliation. "My chest, I breathe," Richard murmured, sliding down the elevator wall until he was sitting on the floor. Michael didn't hesitate. He dropped his bag and knelt beside the doctor. His calloused hands, hardened from years of work, checked Richard's pulse with a precision that even surprised him. "Doctor, do you have a history of heart problems?" he asked, while loosening the doctor's tie. Richard could only nod weakly, his breathing growing more labored. Michael knew exactly what to do. He laid the doctor flat on the elevator floor, tilted his head back, and checked that his airway was clear. "I'm going to do chest compressions, doctor. Hang in there," Michael said, placing his interlaced hands over Richard's chest. He began compressions at the right rhythm, counting silently in his head. His technique was precise, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. With each compression, a bit of color returned to Richard's face. "How do you know how to do this?" the doctor managed to ask between breaths. "I learned taking care of my grandfather," Michael replied without stopping. He had 3 heart attacks before he passed. Richard watched the young man's hands in awe. These weren't the movements of someone who'd learned from a basic first aid course. There was real technique here, deep knowledge. After a few minutes, the elevator started working again. The doors opened on the 11th floor where a medical team was already waiting, alerted by Michael's cries for help through the intercom. "Dr. Anderson!" a nurse shouted, rushing over with a stretcher. "I'm fine, Sarah," Richard said, still breathless but able to stand with help. "This young man saved me." As the team wheeled the doctor away for examination, Michael picked up his bag, ready to leave. He'd already lost too much time and still had one more delivery to make on the same floor. "Hold on, kid," Richard called out as he was placed in a wheelchair. "What's your name?" "Michael Johnson, doctor. Hope you feel better." "Michael, thank you. Really." For the first time, the doctor looked at Michael not as an obstacle, but as the person who had just saved his life. There was something in his eyes, an intensity he couldn't explain. Michael headed to room 1107, where he was supposed to deliver medication for a private patient. He knocked and entered, finding a woman in her 40s seated beside the bed of an older, visibly frail man. "Are you Jennifer Wilson?" Michael asked, checking the name on the order. "Yes," the woman replied, her eyes red from crying. "Did you bring my father's medicine?" Michael handed over the bag of medications, but something bothered him. The man in the bed was breathing heavily, and a monitor beside him was emitting alarming signals. "Sorry to ask, but are you okay?" Michael said, stepping closer to the bed. "My father is waiting for emergency surgery," explained Jennifer. "A heart problem. Dr. Richard was supposed to operate today, but it seems he fell ill and—" Michael felt a tightness in his chest. The man in the bed was William Wilson, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. And the doctor who was supposed to operate on him was the very man he had just saved in the elevator. "The problem is, the substitute doctor is stuck in traffic," Jennifer continued, desperate. "And Dad can't wait much longer." At that moment, the door opened and Nurse Sarah walked in, accompanied by Dr. Richard. The doctor was moving slowly, still pale but insisting on working. "Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry for the delay," Richard said, approaching the bed. "I had a slight spell, but we'll begin prepping for surgery." Michael watched Richard's hands. They were visibly trembling. The doctor tried to hide it, but he was clearly too weak to perform such a delicate procedure. "Doctor, with all due respect," Sarah said quietly, "you shouldn't operate today. Your hands are shaking." "I have no choice, Sarah. If we don't operate now, Mr. Wilson might not make it till tomorrow." Michael knew he should leave, that this wasn't his business, but something kept him there watching the situation unfold. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. Richard tried to examine William, but his hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the stethoscope. Jennifer noticed and grew even more anxious. "Doctor, are you sure you can operate on my father?" "Of course," Richard replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Then Sarah looked at Michael and her expression changed completely. She studied him for a few seconds, as if trying to remember something. You're Michael Johnson?" the nurse asked, stepping closer. "I am," Michael replied, confused. "Oh my goodness. Michael, don't you recognize me? I'm Sarah, your surgical techniques professor from med school." Michael's heart raced. That was a past he'd rather forget, a wound that hadn't fully healed. "Professor Sarah," he murmured, lowering his gaze. "But what are you doing working as a delivery man? You were the top of your class. Your hands were the steadiest I'd seen in over 20 years of teaching." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard looked from Michael to Sarah, trying to make sense of the situation. Jennifer just watched, bewildered. I had to drop out," Michael said, his voice strained. "I couldn't afford tuition anymore." "But you were in your final year, just 6 months from graduating," Sarah pressed, visibly emotional. "Professor Sarah, this isn't the time," Michael interrupted. "Mr. Wilson needs help, and Dr. Richard isn't in any shape to operate." Richard bristled at the comment, but knew Michael was right. He tried to hold a surgical instrument to prove he was fine, but it slipped from his trembling hands. "Michael," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up, "you could assist Dr. Richard in the surgery." "What?" Michael and Richard exclaimed at the same time. "Professor, that's insane," Michael said. "I'm not a doctor, I dropped out." "But you have the knowledge," Sarah insisted, "and your hands are the steadiest I know. Dr. Richard, could you guide the procedure while Michael performs the more delicate movements?" Richard stayed silent for a few moments, watching Michael. He remembered the precision with which the young man had performed CPR in the elevator. "It's a crazy idea," the doctor finally said, "but maybe it's our only option." "No," Michael replied, shaking his head. "I can't. I won't take responsibility for someone's life." "Michael," Jennifer interjected, stepping closer to him with tears in her eyes. "My father is all I have in this world. If you have the ability to save him, please, I'm begging you." Michael looked at the desperate woman, then at William, who was struggling to breathe. His memories flashed back to 3 years ago when he had to give up everything because of money. "I can't," he repeated, walking toward the door. "I'm sorry." Before he could leave, Sarah grabbed his arm. "Michael, I know why you dropped out of med school. I know about your mother." Michael stopped immediately. That subject was forbidden, a pain he had buried deep in his heart. "Mrs. Linda was a wonderful woman," Sarah continued softly. "She came to all the parent meetings at school, always so proud of you. She said you'd be the first doctor in the family." Tears welled in Michael's eyes. He didn't want to remember, didn't want to feel that pain again. "Professor, stop," he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. "She got sick, and you couldn't afford private treatment. The public hospitals had no space, no resources, and you had to choose between continuing your studies or taking care of her. Please stop," Michael begged, tears now streaming down his face. "You gave up everything to care for your mother, but she still passed away. And you blame yourself for not being a doctor yet, for not being able to save her." Michael turned to Sarah, his face wet with tears. "You don't understand. If I had been a doctor, if I hadn't given up, maybe she'd still be alive." "And now you have the chance to save another life," Sarah said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Mrs. Linda would be so proud to see you use your knowledge to help someone." Michael looked back at William on the bed, then at Jennifer, whose desperation mirrored exactly what he had felt 3 years ago. "Even if I agree," he said, wiping his tears, I'm not licensed. I can't practice medicine. In emergencies, anyone can assist, Richard explained, and I'll take full responsibility. You'd just be my hands. Michael, Jennifer said, stepping closer, I don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you're a good person. My father can be saved, and you're our only hope. Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, there was a new determination in his gaze. All right, he finally said, I'll help. The preparation for surgery was quick but meticulous. Michael had to put on surgical scrubs for the first time in 3 years. His hands trembled as he pulled on the gloves, but Sarah stood by his side offering support. Do you remember the procedures? She asked while he scrubbed in. I remember everything, he replied. It's like it was yesterday. In the operating room, William was already anesthetized and prepped. Richard, though still weak, positioned himself beside Michael to guide him. Let's start with the incision, Richard said. Do you remember how to do it? Michael picked up the scalpel with steady hands, as if he was born for this. His first cut was made with such precision that even Richard was impressed. Perfect, the doctor murmured. Keep going. While Michael was working, Richard explained each step, but soon realized the young man seemed to know the procedures better than many licensed doctors. Michael, where did you learn to do these sutures? Richard asked, observing the young man's flawless technique. From Mr. Robert, our retired neighbor, Michael replied without taking his eyes off the surgery. He was a surgeon for 40 years. When he found out I was studying medicine, he started teaching me advanced techniques in his kitchen, using pieces of chicken. The surgery continued for 2 hours. Michael demonstrated skills that left the entire team in awe. His hands moved with astonishing ease, as if he had been operating for years. Now comes the most delicate part, Richard said when they reached the moment for the bypass graft. This is the procedure that can save or... I know, doctor, Michael interrupted. We need to connect the vein here, avoiding this artery. I can do it. And he did, with a precision that left Richard speechless. The doctor had seen many surgeons throughout his career, but rarely had he witnessed such natural talent. My God, Richard murmured. You have golden hands, Michael. The operation was nearly complete when something unexpected happened. William's heart monitor began emitting a concerning signal. Ventricular fibrillation, Richard said, alarmed. We need to use the defibrillator. But Michael didn't move. He kept working, his hands steady and precise. Michael, did you hear me? We need to stop the surgery. No, doctor, Michael said, focused. I know what I'm doing. With movements that seemed impossible, Michael performed a maneuver that stabilized William's heart rhythm without needing the defibrillator. It was an advanced technique few surgeons knew. How did you know how to do that? Richard asked, amazed. Mr. Robert taught me. He said he learned it from a Japanese doctor in the 80s, but never had the courage to use the technique. Richard fell silent. He knew of that technique, but only from reading medical journals. He had never seen anyone perform it successfully. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Finally, after 3.5 hours of surgery, Michael made the last suture. William was stable, his vitals excellent. The operation had been a complete success. Michael, Richard said, removing his gloves, in 40 years of practice, I've never seen such a perfect surgery performed by someone who isn't even a doctor. Michael just smiled, exhausted but relieved. He had saved a life, and it filled a void in his heart he hadn't even known existed. When they left the operating room, Jennifer was waiting in the hallway, anxious. Seeing the relieved expressions on Richard and Michael's faces, she understood immediately. Is Dad okay? She asked, tears welling in her eyes again. Your family can rest easy, Richard said. The surgery was a success. Your father will make a full recovery. Jennifer threw herself into Michael's arms, crying with relief. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she repeated, clinging to him. You saved my father. You saved my family. Michael was moved, but something troubled him. That sense of fulfillment was exactly what he had lost when he abandoned medicine. This was what he was born to do, what he should have been doing with his life. "Michael," Richard said, stepping closer, "we need to talk." The two walked a short distance away from Jennifer, who had gone into the room to see William, now awake from anesthesia. "What are you going to do now?" Richard asked. "Go back to work, doctor. I still have deliveries to make today." "Are you joking with me?" "Son, you have a talent that can't go to waste. You need to return to medicine." Michael shook his head sadly. "Doctor, you don't understand. I don't have the money to go back to school, and even if I did, I've lost so much time. I'd have to start almost from scratch." "What if I told you that could be resolved?" Michael looked at Richard with suspicion. "What do you mean?" "Come with me," said the doctor, walking toward his office. Inside, Richard sat behind his desk and gestured for Michael to take a seat. "Michael, I'll be straight with you. Mercy Medical Center has a scholarship program for medical students in need, and I have the influence to secure a spot for you." "Doctor, I appreciate it, but let me finish. Besides the scholarship, I could hire you as a technical assistant here at the hospital. You'd work part-time and study the other half. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Michael fell silent for a few minutes, processing the offer. It was everything he'd ever dreamed of, but it seemed too good to be true. "Why would you do this for me?" he finally asked. Richard sighed before answering. "Michael, you saved me today. Not just in the elevator, but also in surgery. You showed me how medicine can be more than just technique. You have passion, you have compassion. And that's rare these days. But doctor, there are plenty of licensed physicians who could work here." "Licensed physicians, yes, but doctors with your talent, with your hands, with your heart, that's much harder to find." Michael felt his eyes welling up with tears again. It was the opportunity he'd always dreamed of but had given up on. "I need to think about it," he said, standing up. "Of course," Richard replied, "but don't take too long. Life doesn't give many second chances." Michael left the hospital that afternoon with his mind racing. He returned to his small home in the South Bronx, where he'd lived alone since his mother passed away. That night, he sat in the kitchen and looked at the photo of his mother on the fridge. Linda Johnson had been a housekeeper her whole life, but always dreamed of seeing her son become a doctor. "Mom," he said, talking to himself, "I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to try again and fail once more." He stayed up late, remembering the surgery, Richard's words, Jennifer's desperation. For the first time in 3 years, he'd felt useful, like he'd made a difference in someone's life. The next day, Michael returned to the hospital, earned. Not to work as a delivery man, but to give Richard an answer. He found the doctor leaving William's room, who was recovering well. "Doctor, I accept," Michael said without hesitation. Richard smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome back to medicine, Dr. Johnson." "I'm not a doctor yet," Michael corrected. "You will be soon, and when you are, you'll be one of the best this country has ever seen." The next 2 years flew by. Michael studied in the mornings and worked at the hospital in the afternoons, learning advanced techniques from Richard and other renowned doctors. His grades were the best in his class, and his surgical skills developed impressively. But it wasn't all easy. Michael faced prejudice from some classmates who knew about his humble background, and from professors who doubted his ability due to his time away from studies. "You can take the boy out of the South Bronx, but you can't take the South Bronx out of the boy," a classmate said one day when Michael made a small mistake in a practical exam. Michael felt anger, but remembered Richard's words. Use anger as fuel, not as an obstacle. And that's exactly what he did. He studied harder, dedicated himself more, and proved that his origins didn't define his potential. During this time, Michael stayed in touch with the Wilson family. William recovered completely and always made sure to greet Michael whenever they met at the hospital. Jennifer became a close friend, always offering support during tough times. "Michael," she said one day, "I know my father would love to help with your studies. He has plenty of money and—" "Thank you, Jennifer, but that's not necessary," Michael interrupted. "I'm managing fine with the scholarship and my job at the hospital." "You're too proud," she said, smiling, "but I admire that about you." What Michael didn't know was that William Wilson had secretly donated a significant sum to the hospital's scholarship program, specifically to ensure students like Michael could continue their education. By the end of his second year, as Michael was about to graduate, something unexpected happened. Richard was diagnosed with a degenerative condition that would affect his ability to perform surgery. "Michael," the doctor said one day after the tests, "I need to tell you something." "What is it, doctor?" "I'll have to retire from surgery. My condition doesn't allow me to operate safely anymore." Michael was stunned. Richard was more than a mentor. He had become a father figure to him. "But doctor, there are treatments, therapies. I've tried everything, Michael, but I'm not sad about it. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because I trained you. And I know you'll be able to carry on the work I can no longer do." "Doctor, I haven't even graduated yet." "You will in 3 months. And when you do, I'll recommend you for a residency in cardiovascular surgery at the best hospital in New York City." Michael couldn't hold back his tears. The man he had once helped by chance in an elevator had completely changed his life. "Doctor, I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me. Just be the doctor you were born to be." Dear listener, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. Michael's graduation was an emotional moment. He was top of his class, chosen to speak on behalf of all graduates. In his speech, he talked about second chances, how a single act of mutual help could change the fate of 2 people. Richard was in the audience, applauding proudly. Beside him, Sarah wept with joy. William and Jennifer were also there, along with several hospital staff who had followed Michael's journey. "I want to dedicate this diploma to my mother, Linda Johnson," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, "who couldn't be here today but always believed in me. And to Dr. Richard Anderson, who showed me it's never too late to start over." After the ceremony, Michael was surrounded by his classmates' families, all offering congratulations and job opportunities. But he already knew where he wanted to be. "Dr. Michael," a voice called from behind him. He turned and saw William Wilson, accompanied by Jennifer. "Mr. Wilson, it's so good to see you here." "I wouldn't miss your graduation for the world," William said, shaking Michael's hand. "After all, you gave me a second chance at life." "Actually, sir, it was you who gave me a second chance," Michael corrected. William smiled and nodded to Jennifer. "Michael," she said, "we have a proposal for you." "What kind of proposal?" "We want to open a community hospital in East Harlem," William explained. "A place where people like your mother can get quality care, no matter their financial situation." Michael was speechless. It was exactly the kind of project he had always dreamed of. "And we'd like you to be the medical director," Jennifer added. "But I just graduated. I don't have the experience to run a hospital." "You have something more important than experience," William said. "You have a heart, and you understand the needs of the community because you came from there." Michael looked around and saw Richard approaching, smiling. "Doctor, did you know about this?" "Of course I did," Richard replied. "It was my idea. I thought, what better way to use my knowledge than to pass it on to someone who will help those most in need? But doctor, what about the residency you had secured for me?" "The residency is still available," Richard said. "You can do your residency in the mornings and work at the community hospital in the afternoons. It'll be tough, but I know you can handle it." Michael felt overwhelmed by the generosity of those around him. 3 years earlier, he had just been a desperate delivery driver. Now he was being offered the chance to fulfill all his dreams. "I accept," he finally said, "but on one condition." "What is it?" William and Jennifer asked at the same time. "I want the hospital to be named Linda Johnson, in honor of my mother." William smiled and extended his hand. "Deal, Dr. Michael." The construction of Linda Johnson Memorial Hospital took a year. During that time, Michael completed his residency at the hospital where it all began, under the supervision of other doctors, since Richard had fully retired. Michael specialized in cardiovascular surgery, following in his mentor's footsteps. His skills continued to impress everyone around him, and soon he was handling complex cases with the same skill he had shown in his first surgery. When Linda Johnson Memorial Hospital opened, Michael was ready to take his place as medical director. The hospital was modern, equipped with cutting-edge technology, but its philosophy was simple: to serve everyone regardless of their financial situation. On the first day of operation, Michael made sure to personally attend to the first patients. Among them was Mrs. Margaret, a 70-year-old woman who needed heart surgery but had no insurance. "Doctor, I can't afford to pay," she said worriedly. "Mrs. Margaret," Michael replied with a smile, "you won't pay a thing here. This hospital was built precisely for people like you." And so Michael operated on Mrs. Margaret, saving her life just as he had once saved William Wilson. The difference was that this time, he wasn't just a delivery driver who knew first aid. He was a trained, specialized doctor, fulfilling his mother's dream. Richard, though retired, visited the hospital regularly. He enjoyed watching Michael work and took pride in what his former protégé had become. "Do you realize what you've done, Michael?" Richard said one day, observing the hospital's activity. "What do you mean, doctor?" "You didn't just become a doctor. You became the hope of an entire community." Michael looked around and saw people being cared for, the halls filled with patients who before would never have had access to such treatment. He felt his mother would be proud. 5 years had passed since the opening of Linda Johnson Memorial Hospital. Michael had married one of the hospital's nurses, Emily, and they were expecting their first child. The hospital served thousands of people every month and had become a regional leader in cardiac care. One Monday morning, as Michael was preparing for surgery, Sarah walked into his office. "Michael, there's someone outside who wants to speak with you." "Who is it?" "A young man. Said he's a delivery driver and heard about your work here." Michael sighed. Over the years, many young people had come to the hospital, interested in following a path like his. He always tried to help, but not all of them had the means to pursue medical school. "Send him in," Michael said. The young man who walked into the office was about 20 years old, wearing a delivery uniform and carrying a red backpack identical to the one Michael used to wear years ago. The resemblance was so striking that Michael felt like he was looking at his younger self. "Dr. Johnson, my name is Kevin Smith," the young man said nervously. "I really wanted to talk to you." "Go ahead, Kevin, what can I do for you?" "Doctor, I heard your story. How you used to be a delivery driver and became a doctor. I also dream of being a doctor, but you don't have the money to study, right?" "Exactly," Kevin replied, lowering his eyes. "I live alone with my grandmother. She's sick, and I need to work to support us." Michael saw in Kevin the same determination he'd had years ago, but he also saw the same hopelessness that had overwhelmed him when he had to drop out of school. "Kevin, did you finish high school?" "Yes, doctor. I was always a good student, but medical school is so expensive. What if I told you there's a way?" Kevin looked up, hopeful. "What do you mean, doctor?" Michael smiled, remembering Richard asking him the same question years ago. "Kevin, this hospital has a scholarship program for students in need. Besides, I can hire you as a technical assistant. You'd work part-time here and study the other half." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. "Doctor, are you serious?" "Completely serious. But there's one condition." "What is it?" "When you graduate and become a doctor, you'll have to do the same for another young person. That's how we keep this chain of help going." Kevin couldn't hold back his emotions and began to cry. "Doctor, I promise I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Michael said, standing up and extending his hand. "Welcome to medicine, future Dr. Smith." In that moment, Michael fully understood what Richard had felt when he decided to help him. It wasn't just about training a doctor. It was about creating a chain of change that would last forever. Years later, Michael was in his office reviewing some files when he received a call that moved him deeply. "Dr. Johnson?" said the voice on the other end. "Yes, who's speaking?" "It's Kevin, doctor. Kevin Smith." Michael smiled. Kevin had graduated as a doctor 2 years earlier and now worked in the emergency room of a public hospital. "Kevin, what a joy to hear your voice. How are you?" "I'm doing great, doctor. Actually, I'm calling to share some news." "What news?" "Doctor, Today, a young man showed up at the hospital. He's a delivery driver and helped me when I got sick during my shift. I found out he was studying nursing but had to drop out because of money. Michael felt a shiver. The story was repeating itself once again. So, Kevin. So I remembered the promise I made to you. I'm going to help this young man finish nursing school, and when he graduates, he'll help someone else. Kevin, Michael said, touched, you have no idea how proud I am of you. Doctor, everything I am today I owe to you, and to Dr. Anderson, whom I met through you. How is Dr. Anderson doing? He's well, Doctor. Retired, but he still drops by sometimes to check on his grand doctor kids, as he likes to call us. Michael hung up the phone with a full heart. He looked out the window of his office and saw the hospital's bustle, people being cared for, young medical students doing their rotations. He thought of his mother, who had passed away dreaming of seeing him graduate. He thought of Richard, who had believed in his potential even when he didn't. He thought of William and Jennifer, who had made the hospital's construction possible. But most of all, he thought of that day in the elevator, when it had all begun. A simple act of helping someone had changed not only his life, but the lives of hundreds of people who had benefited from the hospital, the doctors he had helped train, and the doctors those doctors would go on to train. Michael understood that sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen when we least expect them. A stuck elevator, a man falling ill, a choice to help even after being humiliated. Small acts that spark great transformations. That afternoon, Michael performed his last surgery of the day. It was a complex procedure on an 8-year-old boy from an underprivileged family. As he operated with the steady, precise hands that had made him famous, Michael reflected on how unpredictable life could be. He had entered that hospital years ago as a simple delivery boy. Now, he was the chief medical officer, had saved hundreds of lives, and trained dozens of new doctors. But most importantly, he had fulfilled his mother's dream and honored the trust of everyone who had believed in him. When he finished the surgery and learned it had been a success, Michael removed his gloves and looked at his hands. The same hands that had once carried delivery bags now saved lives every day. He stepped out of the operating room and found Emily in the hallway holding their 2-year-old son, Michael Jr. "How did the surgery go?" she asked. "It was perfect," Michael replied, scooping up his son. "Another life saved." "Daddy's a doctor," the little boy said, grinning. "That's right, son. Daddy's a doctor." And in that moment, Michael knew he had found his place in the world. It didn't matter that he had started as a delivery boy, that he had faced hardships, that he had almost given up on his dreams. What mattered was that he had persevered, accepted help when he needed it, and now repaid that help every single day. That evening when he got home, Michael sat in the living room and looked at the photo of his mother still displayed on the shelf. Linda Johnson smiled in the picture, wearing her maid's uniform but with eyes full of pride. "Mom," he said, speaking aloud as he sometimes did, "I did it. I became a doctor, built a hospital in your name, and I'm helping others achieve their dreams too." That night, Michael slept peacefully, knowing he had fulfilled his life's purpose. And in his dreams he saw his mother smiling, finally at peace, seeing the son she had raised become the man she always knew he could be. The end of the story. So, what did you think of this inspiring story? Can you imagine how a simple act of kindness can completely change someone's destiny? Share your thoughts about Michael's journey in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one. Thank you so much for being here.